Ania.
We have some questions from our viewers.
All right, please proceed.
Okay, the first question is about contact, and the idea is the COVID relief bill includes a 180-day disclosure portion that dictates that government officials must disclose what they know about UFOs and ETs. And that grace period ends on June 1st. Can you tell us what we can expect to have disclosed after that, and how accurate the information they're releasing is? Since the government and military are controlling the release of information, is there anything we can do to ensure that we're entering into a peaceful relationship rather than a fear-based relationship with ETs?
There may be those who will manipulate and use the information to their own ends. So the idea really is not about questioning of the accuracy of the data of the existence of craft, of UFOs, of UAPs, whatever you wish to call us. The idea is how you choose to respond regardless of how others may frame the information. So the information itself, the existence of the craft themselves, is accurate. How they are framed, how they are presented, you decide for yourself whether to buy into and align with anyone who may choose to project it in a fear-based way, or choose to allow yourself to look past that and simply know that more information is being released, and staying in a positive state will allow you to take the actions necessary to ensure that ultimately the world will know that our intentions are peaceful.
It was actually quite exciting because it was even on CNN, they were discussing with retired Army generals about this information. And the validation of the existence of these crafts is really starting to permeate the collective now.
Yes, these are the beginnings of disclosure. Again, as the beginning with many things on your planet, there may be a few little bumps in the road, as you say. There may be different opinions, different reactions, but you understand our intentions. And as some people have pointed out, the level of technological advancement that we and other extraterrestrial beings possess, being several thousand years ahead of your technology, if we had really intended you any harm, we would have done it long, long ago because we had the capability. Why would we have waited? So allow yourselves to remain using common sense, logic, understanding. Just take a look at what's happening and allow yourself to sift through the information in a way that allows you to tell the difference between one group's agenda and another's. But understand our agenda is the idea of peaceful contact.
Yes. Are there like lower vibrational ETs that are working with other governments in the world here?
In some senses, being the idea of the Greys more often than not, but again, remember, they're not exactly alien. They are a mutated race of humans from a parallel version of Earth, and therefore there is more similarity between them and many people on your planet than there is between us and the true extraterrestrial races that are engaging with your world at this time.
So one person was sharing the feelings that came up when they looked at the ET cutout exercise, and they handled that. They noticed that a certain subconscious beliefs started coming up, like that black eyes are evil, and that you have no power because you're just an average human.
Well, this is what the exercise is for, to bring these things up so that you can deal with them and let them go.
So if the idea is when you're doing these exercises to start letting go of negative feelings that come up that cause you to want to withdraw.
Yes.
And are these beings of high enough frequency that they would cause psychic shock, similar to what we might experience if we were to encounter you without being prepared?
There are differing degrees of vibrational energy present, but of course, this is why we're giving you the cardboard cutouts, so that you can get used to this idea, clear out the negative and fear-based belief systems, and raise your own frequency to be more equal to those who will come first, such as the Shalanaya and the Yael, which will have vibrational frequencies closer to your own, so that you won't necessarily have to go into psychotic shock if you raise your frequency enough by clearing out the fear-based belief systems through these kinds of exercises as we present them to you.
So talking to you this way is preparing our frequency to some degree, but at the same time, we still really would not be comfortable having contact with you because of the level of your particular frequency. Whereas with the Shalanaya and with the Yael, their frequency is much closer to ours.
Yes.
And so we would be able to interact with them just the way we would another human, or
if you raise your frequency enough, yes. They're closer to you, they're not identical to you. That's why the exercises are important, and the absorption of the information that we share that raises your frequency by following the formula and acting on your passion are all crucial to raise your frequencies to the level where you will be more vibrationally compatible with the Shalanaya, with the Yael, but you don't have as far to go as you would with us or other beings of higher frequency.
So, like, what level frequency would we need to experience contact with the Yael or Shalanaya comfortably?
A consistent, relatively speaking, frequency of about 150,000 cycles per second.
Okay, and then to experience your frequency or have contact with you, what level would our frequency need to be on to be comfortable?
More along the line of 250,000 cycles per second.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yes.
So, what kind of roles in open contact will we have? Will there be ambassadors and emissaries from Earth that act as go-betweens with the Essassani, or will there be some humans just designated to roles as contact receivers or public educators or facilitators?
To some degree, these ideas will be put in place, but it is a little too soon to tell or to give you specifics exactly about how these roles will play out.
Okay. And I don't know, you mentioned something about a full contact council. Is that familiar to you?
Yes, yes.
In the protocols of first contact, one of the next steps given was contact with the full contact council. Can you give us an update on what we can expect on that?
No. This is premature.
Okay. If the Earth was polluted in the parallel timeline where humans had to mutate basically into the Greys,
yes.
Why didn't they just set up colonies on another planet instead of mutating themselves?
It wasn't just an issue of colonization. They had already altered their genetic structures to the point where they could no longer reproduce. Therefore, no matter where they were, they would die out.
I see. Do the Greys have a special connection to the UK? And is that why, according to a book that there is a Grey language that resembles Gaelic?
There are connections to many different places on your planet regarding the Greys. There is no connection to the UK that is relatively different than any of the other connections.
And do you have mentors who are Essassani and were training you to become a first contact specialist? And were any humans involved in your training also?
We have discussed the idea that my own father was one of the mentors who trained me to become a first contact specialist. There are those that do specialize in those kinds of things, such as my father. Humans directly, no, were not involved, but simulations of humans were.
When you were experiencing a simulation of human contact, at the time it was happening, did you know it was a simulation?
No.
And what was your response emotionally to that kind of contact?
In the early stages, surprise, sometimes even to the level of disbelief.
What was the disbelief part?
Well, understand, as we have said, that there are not many civilizations we have encountered that have the same degree of density and forgetfulness that humans on Earth do regarding their concept of connection or disconnection to existence. And therefore, there were many things that we were presented with regarding human society that we thought, in a sense, were a trick to see whether or not we would believe what was being presented to us. When we found out that what was being presented, the degree of the limitation being presented to us in your society was not a trick, we found that to be almost unbelievable, because we had been brought up to be relatively challenged by believing that beings could actually experience that kind of disconnection from their source of power. Nevertheless, we got used to the idea that this would be a unique and exciting challenge, and therefore, as you say, I leapt at the chance.
So are there like second and third contact specialists also in your society?
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, the idea of the being that we have referred to as Anima, which is a colleague of ours, and we have referred to her as a social engineer. So these kinds of ideas of then engaging in different aspects, different kinds of encounters, different kinds of information that gets shared, different kinds of interactions and exercises to allow a civilization to become part of the Interstellar Alliance are handled mostly by the so-called second and third level contact specialists.
Like when we reach the stage when we have would we have third contact specialists here on the planet? But they wouldn't be Essassani, right?
Well, some of them might be eventually, yes.
But our frequency would have to be a lot higher for us to interact with them.
Yes, well, again, this happens in stages.
So the first contact level will go on for how long? Get any idea on that?
Well, we have already told that the window of open contact, which is mostly about the idea of first contact, is between your year of 2023 to about 2033 or 2040-ish, as you say. And therefore, thereafter, because of the acceleration that can occur during that first window of first contact, can then lead to the idea of second contact, again, starting intermittently, until such time as perhaps another decade, where things may accelerate to the point where the very, very early beginnings of third contact specialists can begin delicately and gently and intermittently laying out a foundation for what can occur next based on the choices that people on your planet are making based on the level of vibration they have achieved by that time.
So let's say in the next 6 months, as this information starts coming out about ETs,
yes,
and their presence potentially, I guess right now they're not even saying it's ETs. These may be unmanned or some sort of phenomenon, and they're even renaming it instead of calling them UFOs.
Yes. Unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, which is fine. And it's fine that they do not necessarily speculate that they are extraterrestrial craft, as long as they state that they are open to the possibility that will be a sufficient difference to begin to alter the mindsets of individuals on your planet to recognize that we and our existence may at least be possible
And that's part of what shifts our consciousness slowly.
Yes.
It reminds me of when humans thought the earth was flat, in a sense.
Well, some of them did, and some of them still do, even though it is a fallacy that was actually a predominant belief on your planet. Most of the cultures on your planet have known for quite some time that your world is round.
So, like the Native Americans, they were very connected to, I would say, Sirius energy. Is that accurate?
For a lot of them, yes. That doesn't mean they weren't connected to other things, but Sirius played a predominant part in their understanding of their connection to other kinds of consciousnesses in the cosmos, yes.
So, what other groups were part of the connections that earlier humans were experiencing?
Pleiadian was a part of it. Of course, the original Anunnaki. Sirius did play a part, as we said. In terms of actual interaction, there were a few others we cannot name. But the idea of energetic connections is much broader, such as Orion energy, Arcturus energy, so on and so forth.
So that would have been more like through channeling, let's say like the Oracle of Delphi, or those kinds of connections to higher dimensional beings, as opposed to actual.
Yes, although a lot of that is not necessarily extraterrestrial, but more the idea of the connections to the higher mind and the spirit realm.
So we've had a smorgasbord of other dimensional beings to connect with, and it was more dependent on an individual's theme or their particular purpose in a lifetime, whether they would encounter these beings.
Both individuals and also cultural groups, yes.
So which cultural groups were most receptive to contact with extraterrestrials?
Most indigenous cultures, before the advent of what you consider to be quote-unquote civilization.
So, like the Lemurians, were they open to contact and well aware of it? Or?
Oh, absolutely. Since they were one of the first generations of human away from the Anunnaki.
Okay. What are some of the forms of entertainment that beings in your civilization enjoy?
We have talked about the fact that I am a sculptor. There are those that enjoy the idea of singing. There are those that enjoy many other kinds of artistic expressions. Exploration is also a form of entertainment, as long as education is involved as well. The idea is that it can take any form spontaneously that any particular individual in our civilization feels the need to express. Although some of them are going to be relatively different than the forms of entertainment that you experience. However, there are things that are sort of similar to physical activities, such as sports, so on and so forth, but a lot of things also take place on energy levels that you don't necessarily experience yet.
Do they also have a group of beings that enjoy sort of more the shamanic type of activities with communication of plants and animals and other, well, I mean, it seems like you do that all the time. But
yes, of course. We don't necessarily consider that entertainment in the way that you asked the question. That's just our normal daily activities.
So what have you
I'll
discovered?
give you a particular example.
Yes.
One form of entertainment, in particular practiced by a lot of children on our planet, is the idea of what might loosely translate in your language as to popping through dimensions. So the idea is that you can sit still and you can pick a number of parallel realities to relate to. Again, it can be a random choice. It can be decided in any number of ways. Maybe even someone in the group of children will say the number 12. And so all the children will, in that moment, allow themselves to feel a rush of their consciousness popping through 12 different parallel realities in that moment, and then afterward sharing the different experiences that versions of them had in those different parallel realities. That is a form of entertainment as well as education.
And like children here, they love to pretend. Like they can pretend that they're a certain animal, or they can pretend they're a fireman or something like that.
Yes.
How is those ideas expressed in your culture?
More truly experientially. In other words, they can learn to shift their consciousness to experience life literally from the perspective of an animal.
So I could even see this imagery of like a bird flying and being able to see through the eyes of the bird.
Yes.
From that vantage point.
Yes.
That's very exciting.
And to some degree, similar to what you have referred to as shamanistic.
NASA is sending a manned crew to fly by the moon in summer 23. This seems synchronous with the opening of window of contact. Can you update us on anything that may happen during that kind of experience?
There will be, as before on other flights you haven't been told about, observations of various craft.
And like in Virginia Beach, I guess the craft have been buzzing ships.
On many places on your planet, this has been increasing. In that area, as you already have heard, off the coast of what you call your San Diego area, and a few other places around your planet, sightings are now increasing if you actually pay attention to the statistics.
And the reason for that is?
The beginnings of disclosure.
So they're just making themselves more well known so that we will stop ignoring it, in addition to the changes we're already talking about.
Yes, and having more information to release as authentic.
Oh, I see. And what about the idea of them shutting down the nuclear codes if there's like a nuclear...
Again, simply a message, as we have delivered before, that you are not permitted to have thermonuclear war, because it affects far more than just your planet and your dimension. Now, as we have said, there can be isolated, small, tactical nuclear incidents, as long as they do not affect interdimensional beings and consciousness, then that may not be prevented. But the idea of the shutting down, erasing, or altering the launch codes of many of your thermonuclear missiles is a direct sign that we are still watching and still giving the message that global thermonuclear war will not be allowed.
Thankfully. In your time, can you describe what Earth looks like from your vantage point?
Equating our time frame to your timeline, you will find that even though there are villages and cities per se, they're not built up in the same way that they are now. There are far fewer places that are built up. Many of them are far more like villages. There is a lot more forestation and greenery on your planet. Certain ecosystems have returned and are thriving. The idea, therefore, is that now, by our time, many of you have gone off planet to explore other worlds. You have colonized other planets that have been laid aside for you to do so. So the Earth, in that sense, has been allowed to relax a little bit more into its natural state, even though there is still much activity on your planet, still many high-level technological achievements. None of them anymore are polluting, and they allow for the natural growth to occur on your planet, and also for the shifting of humanity, and also, of course, the arrival and interaction with many different extraterrestrial species.
And our relation to the cetaceans in the ocean and the condition of our oceans?
They are thriving.
And humans respect, at that point, humans respect cetaceans as another sentient life form?
Absolutely. Now, again, please remember, this is not the world you are on. This is the version of Earth that you will be shifting to if you continue to navigate your consciousness in that direction, by following the formula and making positive choices, because that version of Earth already exists and is a version that is far more representative of the idea of contact in a way that we can interact with, because it's far closer to our vibrational frequency. So the idea, again, is it's not the Earth you're on now.
So at the same time as that Earth is communicating with you, other Earths would be in other forms of chaos or disarray.
Yes, of course. Every possible conceivable variation of Earth is already ongoing right now.
Right.
So it's just about the idea of navigating to the one that is more compatible vibrationally with the idea that I have just described.
Yeah, it really is empowering to recognize that by changing yourself, you're able to interact with another level of Earth or be on a different Earth in a sense. And
well, no, it's not in a sense at all. Because the idea that you're doing right now to create the idea of the side effect called time. You're going through billions of parallel reality versions of Earth right now every second. It's not
so the
like
fact,
it is.
So the fact that we have such free will at this stage in our development to choose a dark path or a positive path, but the ultimate effect of that will be experienced by each person because they'll see it reflected in the Earth that they are inhabiting.
Yes, of course. Because again, you can't experience what you're not the vibration of, and conversely, you will only experience what you are the vibration of. So there is an Earth for every vibration.
So I'm assuming that the younger people that are taking this journey would have a greater opportunity to experience a much more advanced Earth once, over the span of their lifetime, say, versus someone who was born in the 50s or 60s and who are at a different stage in their life process.
Well, yes, in general, although again, there's always exceptions no matter when you're born. It just depends upon your modality of perception and thinking and what you choose to buy into as a belief system. So yes, you might say the younger generations have been given more options because of the evolutions in thought that have happened on your planet. It may seem more probable and more likely for them to choose things that will lead to those versions of Earth. It doesn't mean that someone born earlier can't, but we understand what you mean by that.
Is there a connection between pandemics and massive change as almost like a precursor to massive change?
Yes, there is. Because again, massive change in the collective can bring up all sorts of fear-based issues in the collective, and those fear-based issues can play out in physical reality in a way that then allows you to deal with the consequences of those fear-based issues and release them so that you can allow yourself to transform collectively more easily. But it has been a common precursor to massive change in many of your societies that you will first cause some form of either disease or catastrophe that represents the letting go and the releasing of the fear-based beliefs. But it's not that you have to do it that way. It's simply been the way you have done it because you haven't known any other way to, shall we say, face those things except by bringing them into your reality in a way where you're forced to face those things and deal with them.
So the people who transition during a pandemic, would those individuals then have chosen not to make the change and that they preferred to either, do something different, let's just say?
Well, that can be the case for some of them, and it's not about not necessarily having preferred to make the change. It may simply be that they didn't have the tools to understand they had that option.
Because that's one thing that happens in a pandemic, as with war. Now, is the same thing true of war, that it also is a precursor?
It can be. It can be. Again, you cannot necessarily always generalize these things. You have to look at the different individuals and groups within it and what it is they are choosing relative to those ideas that are expressed by a collective, or at least a group within the collective. So yes, it can represent those kinds of shifts about to occur by the playing out of all the fear-based ideas beforehand so that you can be done with them, let them go, get over them. But again, remember that if they keep occurring, you haven't really dealt with the causational beliefs within yourselves.
So in a way, it's almost like it's a negative tool that can be used in a positive way, but because the earth, in a sense, is still steeped in a lot of negativity, we may still choose mechanisms for transition that are negative in a sense.
Yes, because again, it forces you to face certain things. So in a sense, it's kind of like you paint yourself into a corner and are forced to face certain issues.
Now, as far as our connection with the Sirius civilization,
Yes.
Can you share for us on Earth right now, what kind of relationship do we have with the Sirius beings, and who in particular are we in contact with?
You are in contact with the beings, the physical version of the civilization known as the Nomos. The relationship between you is one of guidance, mentorship, and education. For they brought to your world all sorts of information and tutelage and mentorship on a variety of subjects, like agriculture, mathematics, architecture, so on and so forth. So it's kind of literally like a mentorship relationship that you have with the amphibious culture that comes from the star system of Sirius.
And as far as the dolphins and the whales, are they interacting with the same level of consciousness as we are, or perhaps something different?
Well, they're interacting with the physiological species as well as the non-physical consciousness on a higher level of sixth density that is also associated with the Sirius star system.
Thank you.
Yes.
You also previously made a prediction about the Eastern Bloc, I guess, and a change.
Yes.
Is there anything you want to mention about that?
You are seeing some of the variables of that playing out now in what is going on in your Middle East with regard to the idea of Palestine and Israel setting up certain conditions that, depending upon what choices they make, can spread and radiate and ripple outward to either positive or negative effect.
There's been a lot of questions about Sasquatch.
Yes.
Can you talk to us a little bit about their existence, perhaps their civilization, their art forms, anything else you can share about them?
Well, as we have said, they are the natural evolved hominid of the earth. If certain branches hadn't been altered genetically by the Anunnaki, you would all be Sasquatch today. But the Sasquatch, being very close to nature, have learned many of the different ideas of how nature operates. It's one of the reasons why they can peer into other dimensions and actually shift into other dimensions to make themselves relatively elusive. In some sense, many Sasquatch now consider or still consider Homo sapiens to be aliens, since they contain alien genetics that the Sasquatch don't contain. It's one of the reasons why, to some degree, they still avoid you. So the idea is, again, they are willing to open up certain kinds of dialogue in certain kinds of formats and forums, but you have to sort of look at them as a more indigenous culture, very, very closely bonded with nature, because they understand themselves as nature. And therefore, they have developed many forms of communicational languages that are all nature-based. They can very easily speak to many other kinds of animals and also plants in a variety of ways. And this is the way their culture is based. It's based on different formats of communication and experience in nature and in other dimensional expressions of nature. So art form, in a sense, although this is a very loose term with regard to the idea of Sasquatch, can be the way in which different forms of communication are expressed between different dimensions of nature, different expressions of nature in their cultures. You could say that a very close representation of the idea that you might be somewhat familiar with would be that their entire culture is shamanistic and capable of interdimensional interaction and interactive interspecies exchange with a variety of species, not only in your reality, but in other dimensions as well.
Like, how would we perceive them in versus a chimpanzee? In terms of their development, their way of communicating with each other, do they still have remnants of primate behavior?
Well, to some degree, but again, in a much more natural way. The idea is that you would simply recognize them as an intelligent hominid.
So we would still see them as human and distinctly different from animals in terms of their language.
Let me put it to you this way. When you understand more about the idea of cetaceans, you will see the Sasquatch similarly to the difference you see between a cetacean and a fish.
Yes, because we notice a certain kind of democracy in cetacean organization.
Well, and sentiency and communication. They have language, and so do the Sasquatch. Right. You will see them as a sentient civilization on their own terms. And the idea is that you don't see them as human, you will understand them as, well, I don't necessarily think they would necessarily appreciate being called humanoid, but the idea is that you will see them as their own evolutionary path of a sentient expression on Earth.
Okay. Talking about something called mirror work, which would be similar to like psychomantiums and that idea.
Yes.
Were these methods part of our culture going way back and maybe starting in Atlantean times? Or?
Yes. It began in Atlantean times and progressed through Egyptian times and spread out to many other cultures in the early days of your civilizations. Yes.
And what is the benefit of working with those kinds of tools?
Well, again, like any permission slip, it taps into certain things where people have certain sensitivities to recognize that the idea of reflection, which is what a mirror symbolizes, puts you in touch with not only different aspects of your own consciousness, if you're willing to reflect on them and look with honesty in the reflections in mirrors to see your true self, but also can allow you to look beyond the physical realm as if the mirror is actually a window into the spirit world. Because it can function that way for certain aspects of your consciousness as well. And allow ease of communication with spirits.
So is there something with the subconscious mind that allows it to use it and it gets the conscious mind out of the way in a sense?
Yes. The sub and unconscious minds, which are higher versions closer to the idea of the higher mind. And therefore, yes, getting the conscious mind to relax and allow yourself to see through the looking glass, so to speak, as opposed to just seeing your own physical reflection, is what will allow it to sort of turn into a window into the higher mind realm, which is the realm of spirit, and thus make more ease of communication with spirits, if used that way, in the way it is described to be used in the darkness with a dim light, not seeing anything in the mirror other than a blank canvas, so to speak, like a wall. Thus then getting your analytical mind to relax itself because there's nothing in the mirror to analyze except existence itself, presence itself. And so it becomes a window rather than a reflector.
You know, you once mentioned that that your existence is very similar to being in a lucid dream. Yes. For us.
Yes.
Okay, and that one of the keystone aspects of that is that you can see the symbols for what they are.
Yes.
As opposed to us, the symbols we see, and also because of our training, we think of them as solid. We think they mean one thing.
Yes.
Like a chair, or whereas if you were to see a chair,
yes,
what might that symbol represent?
A sensation of relaxed support.
So that's part of the evolution of consciousness also, is that we start to be able to see through the symbols that are presented to us.
And of course they will change depending upon the circumstance and the situation. Again, similar to the idea of the permission slip as the tarot cards, because even though there may seem to be a so-called quote-unquote fixed image on the card. There are many different attributes to that image, many different kinds of objects that are represented in any one of those cards. And for someone who is sensitive to that particular permission slip and can allow themselves to read them, different symbols at different time, depending upon the interaction of different people, will stand out to the reader in different ways than they have before, letting them know which aspect of the overall image is the most important to look at and what meaning that may bring with it, relevant for the person they are reading for. So even a chair can represent different things. It can represent the concept of relaxed support. It can represent the concept of paying attention by staying in one spot and being educated by something, just as you have your own chairs and desks in school. It can represent many different kinds of things, depending on how many legs it has, how many backs it has, if it has any back at all. So again, even the symbol of the chair can shift according to what's going on at any given moment in anyone's consciousness that is choosing to use that symbol to represent the state of being they happen to be in at that moment.
And there's been questions about how you can achieve the same kind of effect without having to take a psychedelic or a plant medicine. And it seems like it's also connected with the idea of being able to see through symbols when you are in these altered states.
Yes.
Is there other ways of attaining those states of consciousness without...
Of course. There are many different permission slips. The idea of channeling is one of them. Being in the channeling state in the brain allows for these kinds of perceptions.
Okay, and then even some of the things like drumming and
dancing,
meditation.
Drumming. There are many different kinds, meditation, many different kinds of permission slips that generate certain states that will allow for these kinds of perceptions to seem more obvious and natural.
And whereas in a plant-based medicine experience, it may go on and on for hours.
Yes.
You can actually achieve the same thing simply by getting a download when you're in an altered state that you generate naturally.
Yes, of
and
course.
then it unspools within you so that you have recognition of the information you're receiving.
It unspools according to the time frame and the timing that is relevant for the person that has received the download, yes.
I see. Can all kinds of cats, including tigers and lions, can they see interdimensionals? I mean, and elementals and...
Yes, they don't always do it, but they all have the capacity, yes.
But is this something in domestic house cats that has been amplified?
Well, the idea of interacting with humans can amplify it. It can actually also dampen it. It just depends on who they're interacting with and why. Because the idea of humanity being connected to many different kinds of things, the cats can utilize a relationship with humans to magnify and amplify a reason for seeing particular elementals or particular spirits that might be relevant for the particular human that they're, as you say, hanging out with.
Which leads to the next question about zoo animals who are changed because they interact with humans and they deeply interact with human consciousness.
They can. They don't have to, but they can.
And they're in a situation where they're actually cared for very strongly. You know, there's a lot of concern about their well-being, enrichment, and all of these things. So how are we changing animal species and their abilities, I guess, psychically, by developing almost new species that have these kinds of experiences?
Well, again, like anything, it's a reflection of the evolution within your own consciousness. So you will form relationships or generate species that are more reflective of the level of consciousness that you're operating from.
So it's very interesting to watch them change, and the idea that animals can be friends with animals that heretofore would have been enemies.
Yes. It is to some degree not only a reflection of what we just said about the shifts in collective consciousness on your planet, but it is also to some degree the precursors of what we experience in our world about all animals being symbiotic instead of predatory.
So we're just seeing the early signs of that now,
As
our consciousness evolves.
Correct, and you become less predatory and more symbiotic as well.
Right. Do you have any suggestions for making extracts from crystals?
At this time, no.
Okay. Let's see. As far as individuals having challenges with finding time to follow their excitement, and especially if they have children.
It's about being creative and imaginative to make the time, not find it, by understanding how to follow, at least to some degree, the formula. Again, synchronicity being the organizing principle, they will begin to allow synchronicity to organize their lives and everyone in their lives in a manner that serves everyone best, synchronistically, thus creating the time needed in order to continue to and expand upon the actions of your passion. So you have to start somewhere. As long as you are willing to start somewhere and know that it can expand and be willing to allow it to expand without putting a condition on it that you are afraid it will expand too far, that you won't have time to do this or do that is important to you or needs to be done, is a complete contradiction of understanding how synchronicity works. So the idea is to at least act on your passion to the degree you can in the present situation and allow synchronicity as the organizing principle to bring you a more efficient way of doing with your imagination what it is that truly needs to be done, and allow you to also realize that there are different ways to do things that will afford you more time, and that there may be things you don't actually need to do when you're operating more efficiently. And therefore the time again will appear to allow you to continue to move forward. This is one of the side effects of acting on your passion, is that the synchronicity connected to it actually brings you more opportunities to act on your passion and brings with it all of the coordination necessary for everyone that's important to be in your life so that all fits in perfect timing. So it's not an issue of finding time, it's an issue of allowing perfect timing to work the way synchronicity will automatically manifest it for you.
And it also seems like when you're doing something that's your passion, like having a child and raising them,
yes,
that even though there may be tasks involved in that process, yes, that you find quote unquote unpleasant or whatever, if you yes, always frame it as being part of your passion of raising a child,
then you will find ways to do what is absolutely necessary in the most pleasurable way. And you will let go of those things or realize that there may be certain things that either can be done very differently or are wholly unnecessary to do. Again, remember, you have to look at this as a whole system. Being in your passion, by definition, brings with it the ways in which the things that need to be done can be done that are reflective of your passion. You don't have to assume that in your passion there will be tasks that will be unpleasant, because that's a totally contradictory idea of the state of being of passion. The state of passion wouldn't contain things that need to be done in an unpleasant way. That's not a definition of the state of passion. So being in your passion will bring you, if you're willing to allow it, the inspiration, imagination, and insight and synchronistic opportunities to allow you to do the things that truly need to be done that are reflective of your passion, including the raising of children, if that is your passion, having the family that is your passion, interacting with them in a way that is reflective of the passion of every single member in the family, working together automatically, synchronistically, because you're in that state of being together, and nothing is left out that's important. You have to understand how this works holistically. and not try to piece it together like it's a collection of disconnected parts. It's not. It's one system.
We have a phrase here that if you love someone, then you should let him or her be free.
Yes.
Can you share some more about that idea and what that really means in terms of vibrational level?
Well, again, it's not imposing assumptions of structures on relationships that may not be what the relationship is about. So it's about letting go of all of these different assumptions that just because there may be a particular strong attraction, putting an imposition upon it or a supposition upon it about what that attraction is supposed to mean and how the relationship is supposed to play out just because of the strength of the attraction is a complete misunderstanding of the principle of the formula of not having any assumptions or insistence on the way your reality unfolds. So the idea of quote unquote let them be free is the way to truly express the unconditional love that will allow the relationship to show you what it actually needs to be instead of what you've been taught to think it should be. And then you will have what you need to get out of that relationship by not assuming and misunderstanding what it is, letting it show you what it is, and getting what you need out of it, instead of being disappointed because what you thought you needed or wanted didn't happen, because that wasn't necessarily the purpose of that particular relationship.
So many people have challenges with that regarding romantic relationships.
Yes.
And so the idea that we go through a phase, let's say, of having a deep investment in romantic relationships and needing them to be the way we want them to be and our partner to be a certain way and all of that.
Yes.
What is the basis for the dysfunction aspect of that?
Well, fear of abandonment, fear of being unworthy, those kinds of things are the base frequencies of these kinds of behaviors. Again, the idea is that if that's what you're imposing upon the idea of a relationship, then you're actually not in the real relationship anyway, and you've created a self-fulfilling prophecy of, in a sense, being alone, even while you're in a relationship, because you don't know who you're actually in a relationship with, and they don't know who they're really in a relationship with, because you're not being your true self and not showing them who you really are so they can make the choice to be in the relationship that serves them or not. So the idea, again, is it comes from a fear of disconnection, being taught that you are disconnected, being taught that you are not self-empowered, being taught that you need others to complete you. So when you let all that go, the idea of relationships play out wonderfully, joyfully, lovingly, even romantically, in their own natural way, according to what is germane for that relationship. Remember, there are many kinds of romance, so to speak. And so the idea of the way you impose the concept of what romance should look like very often isn't exactly a true romance.
So how do hormones play into this? Because it seems like the more intensely human beings are experiencing their hormonal aspects, the more focused they are on these ideas and their insistences.
Yes, because hormones reinforce the belief that created them. Remember, every belief system, positive or negative, is going to create in your physical body a chemical reflection of the belief, and that includes hormones. So if it's a fear-based belief, it's going to include the idea of a chemical composition of your hormones and many other chemical substances in the body that will reinforce what you have bought into with regard to that belief. And again, that's why when you finally let them go, you often cry them out in your tears, because letting go of a fear-based belief also requires you letting go of the chemical component, which more often than not washes out through your tears.
So as a species, as we evolve, will our hormonal levels change to
Absolutely.
reflect? that. And
absolutely.
so, or do we have heightened levels of hormones now, and perhaps historically when we've had lots of wars and a very patriarchal kind of environment?
How can you not? Again, remember, physical reality is a reflection on every possible level of the state of your consciousness, which is determined by your belief systems in physical reality. So everything is going to adjust itself according to those belief systems to give you a reflection in physical terms. Everything. Nothing is left out.
So using hormones as an excuse really is no excuse, because that will change as you shift your consciousness. Is it mind over biology in a sense?
All you're saying when you use hormones as an excuse is you're saying that you acknowledge that you have bought into a belief system that has generated these particular chemical structures in your body in order to reinforce itself. So you're admitting that there is a reinforcement factor that you find challenging, but nevertheless, if you understand the mechanics of what we've just described, it can't necessarily be used as an excuse to keep doing it, because the idea of recognizing that you have the chemical hormone that reflects the belief should put you in touch with the fact that you have the belief. And therefore, if you're in touch with the fact that you have the belief, you can change it because you know that the belief generated the hormone in exactly the same way that you know that a belief generates an emotion or a thought or a behavior. So just use the hormones in the way that you would use the emotion and trace it back and say, what would I have to believe is true in order to have these chemical components in my body to reinforce this fear-based belief? Just the way you would say, what would I have to believe is true in order to feel or think or behave or experience what I am feeling, thinking, behaving, experiencing? You can use the same technique with hormones as well, because it's all a reflection of beliefs.
Is that part of what the Greys did? They tried to eliminate the hormonal aspect of their expression, so they wouldn't.
Yes, they had to eliminate the idea of the reinforcement of any particular kind of emotional belief or anything like that, because of the work they knew they needed to do and how they needed to focus on it in order to accomplish it. So there would be absolutely no distractions whatsoever, because the idea of the hybridization agenda was very complex, and they knew it would take a long time, and they knew that if they didn't become, in a sense, an emotionless hive mind, they would never accomplish the task.
So they did the shortcut. Instead of changing their belief system, they literally
divested themselves of the belief system in order to become a hive mentality that would then be overseen by those that they had put in charge to oversee, which is the mantis beings.
Okay, and will we see changes as we evolve and ascend in our general theme of exploration, going from the transforming darkness into light, yes, to some other kind of theme as a society?
Absolutely. Again, whatever you're the vibration of determines what you experience. And the simplest way to express that is what we have said before, is that even when you let go, finally, of all fear-based beliefs, you can still continue to evolve and refine yourself by now determining that you can let go of things that are simply not relevant for you, even if they're not fear-based beliefs.
Okay.
That's one example of that idea.
And then lastly, there was a question about technology and sophistication of things like dating apps and other matchmaking services, and how will our experience of dating change in the future if we will evolve more, so we balance out our hormones and we're not so driven by that, and yes, perhaps...
Well, it will be something more similar to what we experience on our planet, because we operate, as we have said, on pure synchronism. You'll meet exactly who you need to meet when you need to meet them. Period. That's dating.
And you won't put on them an insistence that they be someone other than who they truly are. It's much more free-flowing.
Because you will finally be honest with yourselves that you have no clue yet as to who they actually are and why they're in your life. You will allow that to unfold and show you who they are and why they're there, And you will take it moment by moment by living more in the present instead of assuming an entire future that has to unfold because you've met someone. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
So then at this time, please allow yourselves to move forward in relaxation in order to enjoy the unfolding of the meditation about